Hello, can you guys hear me all right?
Good morning.
Morning.
Sorry for the technical difficulties. How are you both today?
We're great.
Hanging in there.
Hanging in there? Um, yeah, so I always do a casual start anyway, so maybe this is just fine. I will tell you, Dr. Kramer, you're a bit of an intimidating person to have on a podcast. So I always like to do a little bit of homework, right? And
Yeah.
so, 450 articles, thousands of citations. And I just thought, first of all, there's just not enough time in the day
Yeah.
to cover all the kind of good, interesting conversations we could have. But thanks for coming on.
Oh, no problem. A pleasure to be able to provide educational support for what you're trying to do.
I appreciate that. So, to start, I always like the personal side as well. Um, so, how do you two know each other? How did that relationship begin?
Well, for me, I was at the University of. I'm a professor emeriti now at the University of Connecticut. I first met. Well, I go back to 1987 when I was at Connecticut for a couple of years before I then went for 10 years over to Penn State University. And then I was involved by the time I got back to University of Connecticut in an administrative role and as a professor back in 2001 is when I started working with Coach Hudy really more intensely because our late great friend Coach Jerry Martin wanted to develop a program, and we were developing a program where we were really the first to really develop a program where in fact we were going to integrate the science and the academics with the strength and conditioning program and try to then integrate it in with sports medicine. And nobody had done that before. And for about 13 years, we had Camelot. We had undergraduate strength and conditioning majors in kinesiology or exercise science. We had master's degrees as well. We then integrated that with the athletic program because they would do internships and we would have this integration of research and teaching and education. And Coach Martin at the time would have me go over and give talks to the staff and we would discuss things. And this is long before the technology was really available. I remember Coach Martin used to send all his staff to the library, which, used to be, you had to go over to the library. So I met Coach Hudy and spent time with her developing really what I had developed at Penn State, nonlinear periodization. And we really were moving it into what's called flexible nonlinear, of which Coach Hudy then went off to the University of Kansas and really made that the type of program today in strength training exercise prescription that was really the only way to go. And we've done more work with that over the years. But so it was really that professional interaction that we had, that integration of really the first in that I know of in the United States where we integrated science and practice together. And my experience at Penn State was I was the head of research there in sports medicine and the Center for Sports Medicine, and we integrated some of that. But we had a lot of disruptors that never allowed it to really completely manifest itself to the potential that I think is out there in several schools, as we know now. And then the last 7-8 years until January or December of 21, we were here in Connecticut with COVID. But I've retired as a professor at the Ohio State University, and I also then work now. I'm the senior advisor for sports science and sports performance at Ohio State with athletics, and they really are trying to drill into the whole construct of integrating science and practice. And I do a lot of the same things I did at Connecticut for all those years. But again, I think this is a burgeoning type of phenomenon. People are trying to do this at various levels, from collegiate sports, professional sports. I know we're working on a book right now. I am on player development right now. And that will be an interesting paradigm for how this type of thing might work. So it really requires that a lot of the coaches and everybody involved get on the same sheet of music with evidence-based practice, similar to the work I did when I was in the military, evidence-based practices, and really looking at the science as driving decision making, and then having the background so you make good clinical decisions day by day, step by step, with data that you are getting from the testing and everything else that's going on with your training programs and monitoring. And the other thing is that just like a physician, you have to then individualize things to optimize the development of each individual. So that's a long answer for a little bit of a coupled history of how I met Coach Hudy. And because she was of that genre back when I first met her and we started this, she's got an inquisitive mind. She's intelligent. She's always seeking answers. And that's really what makes the whole thing work. And I found that to be the case too at Ohio State. The younger ones, and Coach Hudy is kind of leading the pack on this whole thing, are finding out that you gotta know something in order to optimally strength train and optimally develop players for collegiate athletics. And this is going to push down, we think, into the high school levels, which are really kind of limited right now. We're getting ready to do a big study on that as well. So that's kind of it. So sorry for the long answer, but that's kind of the context of everything I'm trying to talk about.
A, no reason to apologize, but B, you just illustrated the problem I was talking about at the beginning. You said like 15 interesting things, right? And so now it becomes a tyranny of choice, like which one do we actually talk about? So
I could talk all day.
I warned my wife last night. I was like, I'm pretty sure we're gathering some people that could all talk the air out of any room you put them in. So, I'm of the same ilk. So, but I'm going to back up and ask Coach Hudy, like, what do you remember anything particular from the early days when you first met Dr. Kraemer?
Yeah. I was probably in my 6th year of being a performance coach, and there were frustrations along the way with coaches having players get in the weight room, right, and do some good quality work. And I remember walking down the hall, knocking on his door, and I'm like, Doc, what do we do? And he said, do what you can, pretty much. But that's when we started really collecting numbers on nonlinear periodization of what we were doing, planned and unplanned. And it was fascinating work because I thought we broke some barriers down and just started this whole, the more you do it, the better you'll become. And it doesn't have to be this high intensity stuff. It just needs to be consistent. We need to do it every day. And I think it was 2009 or 2010, I had the Morris twins at Kansas. And, I think athletes think they know how to work, but then, you take it to another level of having to work and improve performance and health. And these guys, they were a challenge at first, but they turned into two of the best athletes I've ever worked with. But it was, let's just do what we can, and we'll do it daily. And then, we'll teach them and they'll learn along the way. And man, they took off. So it was just, we did small sessions every day until we built a foundation to then increase those sessions. So it was fascinating work, and it's just, we did what we could. There was no plan to it.
What's that?
There was hardly a plan to it.
Well, I like how you asked someone who's incredibly well known for their work in the scientific field that simple question. You got like a deeply pragmatic answer of just do what you can. So it's probably understanding kind of the state of things at the time, at almost any time. But I am interested in talking a little bit more about kind of that balance between working with athletes every day and then trying to conduct good science, because it's a topic that keeps coming up sort of, I guess, in EliteForm circles, like people that use us, that understand technology, but then also are working with some incredible athletes. And it always seems like there's a challenge to anytime we look at a distribution, right, and look at the bell curve of where people stand, elite athletes are on one specific side of it. And then I remember Matt Ray at one point tweeting about like wanting to address the challenge of how do we study that band of athletes. And be curious to know, Dr. Kraemer, over sort of the work that you've done, like how you've tried to sort of address, like looking at those different sort of levels of athleticism.
Well, I think the whole process of analytics, it can be taken in many different dimensions. What I look at with player development is I look at the fact that you have to have sport science and sport performance coaches, strength conditioning coaches, athletic trainers, that basically when you collect data, it's at the quality of what you would collect it for a research project. And that's kind of what we're doing at Ohio State right now. Everything is being collected at research level, or it's not really worth anything. So if you're going to evaluate a workout, if you're going to evaluate a 40-yard dash, or you're going to anything you got, it's got to be done at the level that basically meets the quality of data testing that would be done in a laboratory and field studies. So there's a ton of technology out there. So what we want to do is we want to assess. We started this at University of Connecticut, both in all the different sports, and Coach Hudy might remember some of this with Coach Martin. We put out a player profile. This is what we're looking at. So what are we trying to, in fact, create and to be able to compete at the level that we need to compete at? And basically, then you have a variety of different aspects, from athletic index stuff that Boyd Epley and I worked on way back in the 70s that gives you information. You have, your strength scores, your 1RM strength scores, your different vertical jump, your force plates, the EliteForm type of data that comes from quantifying workouts and understanding the quality or the lack of quality of the workout, what's going on in the progression and timing. So it's all about having people that have the experience. I think the days of being the guy who just lifted weights in a gym and comes over to the athletic department and says, I'm strong, I want to be your strength coach. Those were the 1970s. That was the Wild West. Those days are over. You have to have some training in the sciences, and especially in the training with regard to testing and how you run tests. We had a whole test profile that was done at Ohio State in last year that was not done properly. You can't take a 10-yard sprint off of a 40-yard sprint because people strategize differently to run a 10-yard distance versus a 40-yard distance. So you have to electronically time and make that a concept in itself. So it's by using what we know scientifically, how it's done, to get accurate information. You're going to be making decisions based upon the data that you collect in the workouts and the testing that affect young athletes' lives as you put them together and determine if, in fact, they're going to be able to meet the level of physical development to prevent injury, number one. And that gets into what Coach Hudy and I talk a lot about, and I talk a lot about with the other coaches I work with, is training densities and all this. And then you also have to have the fact that the construct of any data you collect, if it's not done at the highest level with the best technology and basically accurate. So there's a lot of technology out there that is just not valid. So we have to go through validity. Now, having been in the military and having done a lot of stuff with the military, we use a lot of the validation studies for wearables and a lot of things that go on relative to their validity as instruments. So I guess where you get into is the fact that we've got to make decisions on what we're going to do with you in a given short number of training sessions over an entire macro cycle or year, over your 1-year career, your 4-year career. And if we're not improving you on our metrics that basically we need, and some of them just top out. We're not trying to make a power lifter, but we want to make sure that our kids can actually, the men can squat 2 times their body mass in the various sports. And some of the women can do 1.75 times their body mass. But then you got to bring them up because it doesn't happen overnight. And that's where you got to know about progression. And like Coach Hudy said, you got to know about how you're going to progress somebody and analyze their recovery capability. We spend a lot of time in recovery technologies, as Coach Hudy does, because athletes have to recover, and they're all different. Some are genetically, you could beat them with a club, and it doesn't. You can't beat them out. They just come back over and over. Others, you just touch them and they fall down and get injured. So and that relates to a lot of the underlying physiology. But I think the key thing is you have to have accurate technology. You have to have valid technology. You have to have sport performance coaches, strength coaches, everybody involved. When you do a test, it's done at the level of a scientific study. And that's really important. We've done that, and we've actually incorporated that in our systems over the years, including Connecticut. We published a ton of papers at quality level with that integration. So our strength, performance, and conditioning coaches now, I remember when Dr. Matt Reed was a doctoral student at Arizona State with Brent Alivar. So I see these guys, I've seen them I watched their whole histories. And he was one that went and took on that type of thing, as a few others have too. But again, you have to understand the whole playing field, the whole aspect of technology, recovery, training, and then individualization, which is a challenge, especially for large team member sports. So that's the way you do it. You get accurate information to make decisions on, and you make decisions on an individual basis so that you can basically progress the way they recover and respond. And not everybody's the same, and they all start at different levels. And some genetically will never get to the point where they're meeting the profile. And then the question is, are they really just being not put in the right position? There's a lot of mistakes made on putting people in the proper position in a sport or even for a sport. And they go so hard and they have all this. And I feel bad for the little kid, and myself included. I was in the wrong position in college. Maybe good that I was, because my head wouldn't be existing if I would have went further after college ball. But the idea is you want to make sure that you put them in the optimal position to succeed for their own self-esteem and for their own benefit of the manifestation of who they are as an athlete and as a person. So it kind of goes from there.
What position were you in, and where should you have been playing?
Well, I played in the time which I'm now suffering from complete osteoarthritis of all my joints. I basically played at a small college. UW La Crosse was a La Crosse State University. And I was a 5'10 and a half, 5'11", 245-pound athlete that was very strong, bench and squat, the whole 9 yards, very fast, 4'7". But I was being played at center. And, here's the line. Here, boom. Only reason I could play center is because of the fact that the rules were such that you could do nasty things. You could cut, you could chop, you could use spear, you could do all the things in the early 70s and late 60s that you couldn't do now. And that's probably a good thing. But the bottom line was I should have been like I was in high school and got injured. I should have been a linebacker and probably would have fit the model of that position at a major college, but that's a whole nother story. So putting somebody in a position, I could play it, but it wasn't going to take me to the next level. And the problem with football is every kid who plays college football thinks they're going to go to the NFL, which is sometimes a mythology that I think you have to sometimes get with kids. I know when I was coaching at the University of Wyoming as a grad assistant, talking with one of the kids who was WAC Lineman of the Year at the time back in the 70s, I said, you're just never going to make it in the NFL because you're too short. People stand up and, they can't see you. You can't see anything. But anyway, that's a long personal story. So
that's okay. It's fun. And, I think if you'd played linebacker, like some of maybe, I'm going to read into it a little bit, the mean streak that allows you to chop some folks on the line, you could have done some of that at linebacker. Yeah. So that's okay. Yeah, I think one of the, Hudy and I've talked about this just a little bit, like one of the challenges when like you understand sort of the metrics of what it takes to succeed at the next level is you get into that case of there is some outlier that's doing it, right? Like when Hudy and I first met, she asked me like what sports I played or whatever. And I was kind of your typical 3-sport player. And I just referenced Nate Robinson because he's 5'9", played multiple sports, right? And just found a way, despite his lack of height, right, to make it in the NBA. And you could have told me all day, every day, that genetically I wasn't going to make it, but I was just way too way too stubborn to believe anything about that. But like Dr. Kraemer was mentioned, like taking technology into the weight room, and obviously, Hudy, you've done it in a very practical way. Can you talk a little bit about, like, I always try to talk about collection devices, right? And then you can get outside of branding and marketing, right? But it does get into finding validity in such a way that you can execute a plan and know you're doing it accurately. As a quick summary, can you talk about how you're doing that with UConn women's basketball?
Yeah. Right now we have, EliteForm as our velocity-based tracking system, and we use Catapult load management system. We have Sparta force plates. We're doing another study with ankle IMUs to look at asymmetries while the athletes are on the court. We have Aura rings right now too that they are using, not as frequently as I'd like them to get some good data, but we're trying to get better at that. I'm working with Dr. Kraemer's old student, who's now in charge of the Corey Stringer Institute, Doug Casa. I'm a PhD student there, and there's a lot of things going on here. There's a lot of moving parts, and we are collecting great data. And hopefully we can, continue to do that over at least a 4-year span, and really hopefully find some interesting things in terms of how force production is affected by all of these metrics that we're looking at.
So how are you going about, so that's a lot of data, right? How are you going about sort of stack ranking how you view that data? Or, I mean, Dr. Kraemer, you may have some comments just in terms of how you see it scientifically, but one of the challenges sort of becomes, like, once you have it all, how do you not just filter through it, but then, like, how do you understand sort of what you're seeing versus the causality of what's impacting in terms of day-to-day life on the court, that kind of thing? Because it's just a lot of information to filter.
Yeah, we have some students within the exercise science department that are doing small projects with the data that we have right now to see what actually, can we find something? But the Catapult and the IMUs are daily. We do force plate technology every week. We use that to, see the effects of what we're doing. And, the main stimulus, though, is practice and games right now. And it's a lot. But the Aura rings, in theory, are daily also. And EliteForm is daily. So, again, the first year was collecting data, right? And then the second year, we've made some decisions on the data that we have. And I would argue that this is some of the best work that we've done, but it's not showing in the product necessarily because we're dealing with a lot of injuries. But then, then we can talk about early specialization and training background that kind of creep in and rear their ugly heads.
Yeah, I think the whole thing of the real problem that I've noticed working with the different coaches and even people that I worked with down at Yale for a number of years and worked out a lot of the kinks in this thing, including what Coach Hudy's talking about, including our group at Ohio State, is that the problem is it takes a lot of work to take and analyze workouts. There's a lot of accounting going on. You have to account what's going on. You have to evaluate everybody's workout as far as the quality. Now, we've used such things as Team Builder, and now you got everything coming at you. You got reports, you got a variety of things. But the real problem today is that I don't think that many times administration and even head coaches realize the amount of time that the sport performance and strength conditioning coaches now have to spend doing this. It concerns me from the standpoint that you try to use technology to be able to break through and make your work easier. But in fact, right now, the long hours that strength performance, sport performance strength conditioning coaches have to spend is extraordinarily challenging, just as you see athletic trainers. So I always worry about burnout and the fact that it's a very high technology group. So unless you have a lot of staff, I worry about the individual at a small college that's trying to train these athletes. So at the higher level, competitive levels, you have a little bit bigger staff, you have money for technologies, you bring these things in. But what about the little school, my little school, UW La Crosse? They got one guy who teaches a little bit, gives a weight program, trying to do some analytics, and it just doesn't our technology hasn't quite filtered down to make the field such that each of the athletes that we're working with are getting the best possible care. And I think this is where athletic training has had, for obvious reasons, come up a long way over the years, even with all what Dr. Casa did, putting athletic trainers in all the high schools across the country. Well, the same problem is now that we've got to do that with strength and conditioning sport performance. And it's a challenge right now for that phenomenon. But I think we use a ton of technology, but you almost have to have. It's tough for a strength conditioning coach, sport performance coach, to do as I started off as a strength coach. I had to do all the athletic teams, everybody, with a itty bitty weight room in 1976. And I watched the whole history and development of the field, and it's so primordial. But I think many of the same things still exist. It's the quality of the background of the sport performance strength conditioning coach. It's the technology they can have available to them. So that, when we were here at UConn in 2001, we were using paper. We were still taking paper, and Coach Mark, Coach Hudy, they'd have to type in on a computer some type of Excel sheets and all that. It was really very ineffective. So a lot of the stuff now, getting your workout quality, some of it's simple. You look at a prescribed with our flexible nonlinear, you have a plan, but you don't know if the plan's going to work. But here's the mesocycle. Here's what the objective of that mesocycle is for this person. You go do the workout, and then you evaluate, did you hit your target hits? Did you make it? If you didn't, well, why didn't you make it? There's so many disruptors. Sleep. I know we're working on publishing a paper with our women's ice hockey team at Ohio State that won the national title last year. And we were able to track them for the whole year with Oura rings and all the different technologies and strength training, so that we can show that sleep is a very important aspect. If you don't get enough sleep, your ability to really perform and recover is somewhat compromised. So you got all this stuff, but my point is that you have to be able to take technology, look at the primary, what I call cardinal variables. If you go in the weight room, it comes back to very simple things. If you go in the weight room and you're going to have a heavy day, and you got it set up that you're going to do 4 sets at say 85%, and you're going to utilize, in the last 2 weeks ago or a week ago, you used 300 pounds for 6 reps. Now you come in and you can't even get 1 rep with that same load that's scheduled for this strength day. Well, now you have to then, with flexible nonlinear, default to, a disruptor occurred here. Either your motivation is gone, or you're hurt, or in fact, you're just, overreached or something. But then that has to be analyzed on the spot. So that's the big challenge today, with a lot of quality over quantity. Because if you look at the total number of sessions you have with an athlete at any level, you have a very small number of sessions that you're going to try to make these adaptive changes in their body that's going to translate over to the field, the court, the pool, whatever, and it's very limited. So you can't afford to waste training time because you didn't know what they did and didn't hit the mark, they didn't do well, they're not recovered. And this is the challenge today, and you need technology that helps tell you that almost when you're working out and when you're doing the different things you're doing. And that puts a big strain on the professional demands of a coach. When I say coach, I'm talking sport performance, strength and conditioning, sports science. And you have to have a team of people. And we've all pushed into that window. We're kind of in there. And at the top level, we're in there, and we're starting to learn that. But we're not at the level where we think we should be. Even in the professional ranks, they got all the money and everything else. It's very tough because look at the amount of time you have with a high paid athlete and how much time you don't have. Having worked with John Toreen and the Indianapolis Colts for about 10 years. We did this flexible nonlinear was the basis of one of the books we wrote. And he would always say, hey, we got 60 guys in the weight room. I use guys here. They were men, pro football players, and they're all doing different programs. You had Donald Brown, our famous UConn running back, that was doing one program, and Jeff Saturday, who's an old guy, was doing another program because recovery was different. But you had to analyze that stuff. And now the technology is there because there's a need, and I think then software companies and technologies come out. Well, is it valid? Does it measure? Is it, this type of thing so that you can utilize data? But some type of technologies aren't accurate. So then it gives you wrong information. And if you do the test wrong, it's wrong. But it still goes back to the fundamental workout that you're doing to see if you're going to stimulate the adaptive response you want in the body's physiology to prevent injury and in the body's biology and mechanics to help performance in the sport that they're participating in. And ultimately, it's all about getting ready to beat an opponent that you're going to go up against. I think I'm a scientist, and I've been forever, but I was also a competitive athlete. So essentially, whether I'm on a wrestling mat or whether I'm on a football field or a basketball court or a swimming pool, I'm trying to beat the guy next to me. And sometimes I compete always against myself, but I still have to know that it's a competition. And that's part of it. And then you got to balance all that. And then you have the coaches, and they're big disruptors too, because our experience is that coaches mess up more good programs, and the better we can keep them in line with us and not messing up what we're trying to do over here, it's getting better. But I think that's one of the things that coaching education is really important, to educate coaches to understand what lane they need to stay in and be able to evaluate the people who are working with them to know if they're any good or not. So those are some of the things that I would say gives you some food for thought.
You use the phrase cardinal variables, kind of when you were going through that. Can you, for people who may not have heard you use that phrase before, can you walk through what you mean by that?
Well,
how you use that phrase?
Well, what I use that in my own lingo, so to speak, and terminology, is there are markers that are milestones that when something goes wrong, we pay attention to it. And there are many of that, depending upon the context of the marker. For example, I can give you physiology markers we look at in biology. But for example, if your power output on a force plate is all dramatically down, that the power output in a counter movement vertical jump is very simple, but it's very important. If in fact we find that the squat jump, where you don't have the stretch shortening cycle, and if are equal, we look at those are cardinal markers. We've got a connective tissue trouble right now. And then we look at the fact that velocity is important. One of the goals that we try to do in our programs is that at Ohio State, we're trying to make sure that you can move your body mass at a meter per second peak. And basically that shows us your functionality relative to your high threshold power motor units and your velocity training. And then when we get things, we cap things. So there are certain variables that we cap to know that, hey, we don't have to get any better. This is good, because now we can look at the full paradigm. You can't focus just on one thing. I don't care that the guy can squat 3 times their body mass. It becomes irrelevant in our data, but you should have a high level of capability of your kinetic chain, unless you're a powerlifter. But in reality, these are the cardinal variables we look at. And when they drop, Coach Martin had a thing that we got up going a long time ago. Strength is the base of the pyramid. Then you got power. Then you got basically speed, and then the agility, and then performance off. And when you see drop-offs, you always go down the line to see where the drop-off is occurring. Because many times, if you have overreaching, they're not hitting their workouts for the heavy loads, for example, or whatever. So you got to understand your pyramid. So cardinal variables are ones that when I see it, I'm going to make a decision on it, and there's something wrong. I might be in the workout variable. You didn't hit your mark. What's going on? You basically didn't get your power output. What's going on? Your velocity that we wanted isn't here. So you look at things that are going to be decision makers. Okay, that's what a cardinal variable is. When it hits there, you make a decision. Okay, yes, good, go. Oh. So those are the things that come out with the volume of work that you're doing in a workout. Is the volume going down? Well, why is it going down? Because you're not hitting certain marks. So we monitor that. The amount of deceleration forces that are going on as well. We know that there's another part of another injury paper we're going to work on is deceleration plays a big role. And Justin has done a lot of great work. Dr. Mergen has done a lot of great work with some of these aspects too. So like I say, we're pushing into this realm of really starting to understand things, but we're far from where we are. So ESPN asked me one time, well, where are we with the application of science into sports and training technology? I said, we used to be at about 0.01%. I think we're now about, maybe 7 or 8, 9%. But we're still moving up because you have to have a whole grouping to actually make it work. And that means you have to have a lot of tools. As Coach Martin and I said years ago, you got a toolbox. And the toolbox used to be so little, like the one I have in my house. I can't do a darn thing. A little toolbox. But now the toolbox is getting so big. Well, do you have the competence to work with those tools and apply them and understand them? Many people have technology, and I look at it, go around the country, and you'd use that. No, well, it's really nice. That force plate, real nice. You know how to operate it? You know how to calibrate it? Oh, no. So again, we're pushing forward, but there's lots of aspects to make the whole thing actually work.
So just to transition, kind of a touch, we've touched on it a little bit, I guess. Well, Hudy, when you have athletes coming into your program and you're trying to decide in terms of your pyramid where they sit, like how are you going about sort of assessing, because you're kind of inheriting an athlete, right? Like you weren't there as they began to train. Like sometimes I think one would say they haven't really trained, they've just played. So how are you going about understanding where they can then slot in so you can even begin to use things like cardinal variables to decide like where we need to change things?
Yeah, as he said before, we do have those high-end athletes that you could throw anything at them and they've been fine. And then you have people that are pretty sensitive. So we're dealing with all of those issues. And everybody has their own program. Let's say somebody needs to work on balance. They do the same program that that is the template, but they only do it on one leg. So there's a lot of different things going on with different people because we are dealing with a lot of injuries. But, again, we could have all this technology and we utilize it and we make decisions with it. But I would tell you for the population that I work with now, the lack of strength and just having a strength foundation is a major problem for I would argue, most women in sports. There's a lack of development going on there. And then there's early specialization. So they're expected to just jump in and play. And it's like, there's a problem. There's a systemic problem, I think.
I would underscore that because my experience anecdotally is that, I've been pushing, we've done more research in women in my laboratory over the last decades than anybody in the world. And if you look at it, the high school experience for many women, as far as weight training goes, and we're doing a formal study, we're getting ready to roll one out across the country. My hypothesis is that the experience that most women have in weight training in their high school experience is very spotty. They may do a preseason one for 6 weeks. They may not even have the right facilities. So when they come to even major competition scenarios, they're coming in relatively untrained. And then if they're very talented because of their abilities in the sport, they're thrown right into the mix with people who have had that background for 2-3 years. And it varies by sport, obviously, but it's difficult. And that's where their tissue density and their training density of their body isn't really ready. And that's where injuries occur. because they don't have the tissue density. The break points are much lower, so that tissue breaks sooner, tendons and ligaments break sooner and are stretched sooner. And that's why you see such problems with many of the injuries, because the young women coming into collegiate sports may not have any training density coming into it. And that even applies to some men's sports too. You know, there's a predilection of sometime volunteer coaches in high schools that were great soccer players, but they never weight trained. So the high school men's soccer team doesn't weight training either. So there's a lot of evaluations, and I think Coach Hudy does a lot of this, and I agree 100%. Their strength is the core. On one of the women I was talking to a while ago, there's probably about 12 lifts that you get right down to it that really need to be strengthened in the human body movements. We focus on the kinetic chain one with the squats, the bench, the pull, and the cleans and that type of thing. But these things have to be done in a manner that you're going to set that base for them to be able to compete. And I think it relates to the density of tissue and the break points that can occur and the injuries that can occur because they haven't got that density yet. And that's why some people, even in some men's sports, they're not trained or not genetically freaky with their genetics of their connective tissue, even don't last long at the professional level because they really don't have the density of tissue that needs to fight injury. And that's part of the things we see. Strength sits at the base of all that.
I think COVID had a huge impact on sports in general, but especially with those athletes that were coming from high school, it's time for them to develop and be developed. And there was a huge lag in any kind of probably training or even practice. So I feel like that's reared its head.
Do you feel like one of the next steps that's going to take place in terms of an entire staff kind of embracing that thought process is getting head sport coaches to appreciate that balance between having good underlying strength and then being able to perform on the court, and sort of the risk factors that involved when those two things aren't tied together?
Well, I think, not to butt in here with Coach Hudy, but I think Meg Stone at our NSCA conference said it best. She said that she works down East Tennessee with coaching education with Dr. Mike Stone. The real interest area is that we have to educate coaches so they know what they don't know. Now, realistically, a lot of coaches, they basically are putting their faith into the people that they've hired to do this. Now that comes to the next step is, how does a head sport coach know who's actually a qualified, competent sport performance professional? Now we basically talk about the 3 C's. You got credentialing, then you have competence, and then you have commitment. So you can, if you don't have all 3 of those 3 C's, it makes it difficult to really capture the optimal professional that's going to work with a young athlete across their athletic career, even leading into professional ranks. And they're basically disruptions. But I think, yes, it's going to take a lot of education to sport coaches. I always used to say when I was at Penn State, if I could have all the head football coaches in the country have to take a 8-week class with me 3 times a week and learn what they need to learn, I would make the whole field much better. Now, in some places like in Australia, and you find out that to coach, you had to have all this certifications. In fact, some of the best coaches, as we saw in many of the Olympic sports in other countries, were at the bottom level, not at the top level. And that was one of the things. So yeah, coaching education and being able to evaluate and understand what the sport performance, sports science, and strength conditioning coaches are doing and how they integrate. And then integrating academics into it is the next step. And that's something we achieved here for a number of years at University of Connecticut when I was here. It kind of disappeared after I left for a lot of administrative changes in athletics that go on. And that's part of the disruption. When you get changes in coaches, changes in the administration, everything can be very, very disruptive to a program. So a program has to have historical memory and keep developing and not be disrupted by the many things that can disrupt. And that's why it goes like training. You're in shape, you're out of shape. You're in shape, you're out of shape. Great program, bad program. Great program, bad program, because of all the disruptors that can occur as you move forward to make that little guy in front of you. When I say little guy, male or female, that, hey, I'm going to work with you and give you the best chance for success that I can in realizing your dreams, and make sure that we can prevent injury, we can make you better, do all the things Coach Hudy is doing. That's a challenge right now. Coaching education sits at the base of that, but I don't know how and when that's all going to occur with the amount of money that's going on in all the high-level sport coaches and their ability to have to say, I'll sit and listen. But it's a one-on-one relationship that typically makes that happen. I think Coach Hudy could speak to that better than I can.
Yeah, I've been fortunate. Coach Ariema here has, again, the first year was collecting data and learning from that data. And we've gotten, so much better in terms of our overarching umbrella and what we're doing. And it's a challenge, but it's constantly changing. And every athlete is different, as he said. And I'm fortunate. This is the first time I've ever worked with one team. So we do have the time, and we do have the people behind it.
Would you both mind speaking a little bit to transitioning, and this is certainly like EliteForm or velocity-based training specific in a way, but transitioning from simply trying to get strong, and then when a coach can take a group of athletes and actually start thinking about something other than getting to, say, like on the male side, squatting 2x your body weight. On the female side, 1.75. Like, how would you recommend coaches working with younger athletes start to kind of look at and quantify when to make those changes in training?
Well, I want to jump in because sometimes what I say gets misinterpreted so poorly that I've been misquoted so many times. I'm trying to constantly correct myself.
That's one of the reasons I tried to ask it in an open-ended way. So.
I appreciate that. I think what you find out is that each individual athlete will have a strength level, and we always try to train. I've had certain coaches say, we're only going to do these. We're never going to. Well, you got to train velocity movements and strength movements. So you got power and strength movements that are going along, but you have to then start to balance. And basically you're going to balance those type of training programs to know you need this, but you're going to add power. And that goes back into how you design a mesocycle. One dominant for this person that really we need strength, but we're going to make sure you start working on velocity exercises. We're going to test that, see how far, where you are. We're going to evaluate both, because you have to train both power and strength and power in a simultaneous manner. But again, you gotta realize if they're not strong, it's hard to translate it to power. A great study that was done by Rob Newton and Sophia Nymphis down in Australia opened this whole thing up. He was a postdoc of mine at Penn State and went on to do great things now at Corwin, where I'm an adjunct professor even. And the bottom line is that they found out that people who are really low-level strength training, we've verified this now and really need to publish it. If you really have low strength levels, you don't gain power very easily. It's very difficult because you can't function in your kinetic chain. So when you look at force plate power, when you look at velocity power, anything you look at related to moving mass at a specific velocity, a peak velocity, it's very difficult. So that's why strength becomes so important. But those are targets. 1.75 are targets for maybe it takes 2 years to get there. We're not saying we're doing it in a week. Sometimes you can move people up quicker, but it's building up to where the velocity and the power training and the strength training are going up. But you have programs where they don't evaluate it, and the kids are flat across their entire 4-year career. They don't make any pro. So now you got to go back to the workouts. What the heck were you doing? That's called malpractice in my idea, unless you constantly got injured, and then it's dealing with working around injuries. So I think, we got targets up here for what the cutoff is. When you're here, we can cap it. We don't want to get any more. We can cap it. These are things we've learned from a lot of data collection that's out there with some publications, but a lot of stuff doesn't end up in publications for a lot of reasons. But I think we'll see more of that in the future, that will be coming out in publications and looking at large databases. But the bottom line is, it's so individual, and to say, this level, well, yeah, we want to make you stronger. So we found in a number of places, when a woman could start squatting her own body mass, you start seeing it being interesting. And then they get up about 1.25 to 1.4, and they're starting to get stronger. But we have situations where they're not even doing their body mass. So, I mean, if you look at data across the decades, so it's a question. But then you can't forget about the power and velocity training either. You got to do both. So I think, and you got to understand the exercise choices you make. It goes all the way back to my old work that I did way back in the 80s, when I came up with the acute program variables, as paradigms of domains that you got to have. You have choice of exercise, you have order of exercise, you have the intensity you're going to use, the number of sets, and then the rest between sets and exercises. Those are all metrics of domains that tell you what the stimulus is going to be. And that's where the strength conditioning coach uses those variables to understand how are we moving it up. But again, not everybody is practicing the profession at the highest level yet, because we're still trying to teach people the interactions of these different choices they make. And that's where I think Coach Hudy has the advantage. She's been around this stuff for long enough. And with the program we had at UConn, we got a lot of top strength coaches out there that we trained here at UConn. For example, it's just amazing when I think back of the former students now out at the college and professional ranks that really have had the background and are trying to push the envelope up. But you progress up, but you can't train one at the expense of forgetting about the other. It's just the priority. If you're not strong, we can't spend all our time on velocity training if in fact you can't even squat your body mass.
It took probably 56 weeks here for me to feel actually good about the minimal bit of workout that we were doing. So over a year, and I just kind of felt good about it. So it's a process.
Well, we're not very good at being patient sometimes, right?
No.
Like, particularly like, who are we playing on Friday? Like, that really starts to play a role in how patient we tend to feel. We're kind of coming up on an hour, but I did want to ask this of Dr. Kraemer. Is there any question that you've wanted to ask in terms of, I'll just say, human performance, like in all your time in the field, where you've never really been able to dig into it, and it kind of sits out there as a curiosity for you, whether it's like there's not the right device to be able to study it properly, or you haven't been able to access a particular group of athletes you might want to access? Is there anything that sits out there as this high level curiosity that you haven't been able to touch yet?
Well, that's a tough question for me. I think that.
Well, that's why I'm asking it.
Yeah. Well, you got to remember, I was just talking with Coach Hudy, is that the problem we have today in science is that you have a big paradigm that sits here, the human body, and it realms all the way from the gene level all the way to the human performance level across the board. And that context is the big thing I used to tell all my students still today, is you always got to give me the context. Well, you ask me a question, okay, what's the context? What's the situation? What's the deal? If you don't understand the context of your question that you're asking when you're training athletes or you're trying to do a study, you have to put it in context. And the problem with research is we always have really one context. For example, we've done a lot of different studies with tracking teams over time. And that's one of the best things I think we need to do more of, is track teams and have good variables and find out what happens. We tracked a whole football team here in their rise to the BCS bowl game with Coach Edsel and Coach Martin. We tracked them over 2 seasons. So we knew a lot about one area of testosterone, cortisol, damage markers, and everything else. And it's become a classic study now in understanding football. I think one of the big challenges we have in sports physiology is we never get into that competitive environment. For me, I would like to be at the Super Bowl collecting saliva samples at the Super Bowl. If you talk about, or be at the finals at the men's and women's NCAA championship game, collecting saliva samples, but to do it properly and to get it done right. I think in the future, we'll be able to do those type of studies to get in the actual competitive environment to find out what's going on. We've done it enough to know that the adrenal gland is really racing. And many of the mistakes people make in performance is that they overshoot their adrenal adrenergic response, which means they fire out all that epinephrine, and what it does is it basically elevates all the myosin motor, the production of calcium comes out too soon. There's jittery. So I always look at an athlete, if you're overthrowing a pass or you're messing a shot up or whatever, you're in overdrive and you haven't gotten what they call in the zone. But I think the key thing is that we did one study at a Division III program to look at a game, but the game was meaningless. So getting into the competitive environments with some types of technology beyond just what we get with the wearables. We can tell you anything about an NFL game because they all got wearables. We know every little motion. It could tell you everything, and it's in the ball and everything else. And I think that's where any sports, those are easy, but that doesn't tell you about what the body is doing right now. So having the ability to get in and look at the physiology of elite competition or competition, and then how that changes as the competition level raises up. That's what's going on. In an early study we did way back when I was an undergraduate, we put heart rate monitors before that was really a thing on a coach during a game, and we didn't realize, man, it was like 85% of the max heart rate. That guy was running around. I was worried he's going to have a heart attack. So the bottom line is, or another thing we did with another study with the bowling group, we had Dick Weber wired up too, and he was sitting there, the number one seed. Little did I know of the study, and his heart rate just sitting there went up to about 80% of the max level, just waiting to make the final bowl because he could win $30,000 in the early 70s. So getting into the competitive environment and understanding what the biological challenges are, we can predict that. And what we do in our programs is train the adrenal glands so you can modulate it better, and you don't walk into something eyes open and you blow out your thing. In fact, when we did the stuff with the Colts back in the day in the first Super Bowl that they were in, we used to say, and I think about it now, Ari, just relax. And we learned a lot of stuff with the brain, for example, now that the worst thing you can do is, number one, yell at a team right after practice, because all you do is you raise a sympathetic drive and they're going to go nuts. And the other thing that's bad is that, if you look at the old Lombardi speech before Super Bowl II, that was recorded, very simple speeches, all these rah-rah speeches that go on before the game, all they do is elevate, push down on the pedal for the adrenaline to go up. And bottom line is once you have that adrenaline go up and you're out of whack, it comes down, and it takes so long to get it back into a normal motor infecting type of performance. So I guess getting it into just looking at some competitive levels and what the biology is doing under those conditions, I always thought about using my own personal experiences with, championship games, and also with wrestling matches. You think about those things, and it's probably highly different because some people modulate stress very differently than others. So it would be interesting to look at that and then understand how you're trying to pair the biological systems to manage competitive stress is what I'm thinking of.
How are things different when it's just not another game? Yeah, absolutely.
We did a study with Dr. Fry at Kansas where we collected saliva for 27 weeks, and it looked at testosterone and cortisol. And it was interesting that some some guys were affected by academic stress and some guys weren't. Some guys were affected by competition. Some guys weren't.
Yep.
So it's really the individual.
Everybody has different regulatory systems, and that's why your physician has to treat you individually, and with basically a directional aspect of, as I tell you, everybody uses science to put you in a direction. We're going to go north, but exactly where we're going north, we're going to modulate. But some people historically, in my decades of working, we're going south, and I'm going, what the heck's going on? You're going south. Yes, water is good. Hydration is good. Why are you going south? Oh, we don't want water. Oh, this is back in the 70s. I don't know why we didn't kill more people in the coaching world back when. I give you a lot of experiences I had as a coach. That's probably one of the things that makes a difference. As a scientist, I'm one of the few guys in the field, if you look across the board, that was also an athlete in college and also a sport coach in the high school and the collegiate levels, and then working that level. In fact, I think that's one of the reasons that I have insights that are a little different. So you have to look at those people, what their backgrounds are as scientists. Otherwise, I could have spent my whole career just looking in the adrenal medulla at NIH and looking at adrenal function and that, that's what happens. And then I wouldn't know any of this. So it's context again.
I was just going to say that. Yeah, absolutely. Like one of the things, and I think Hudy and I have talked about this a little bit as well. Like I'm always very curious to hear from coaches or like people on my side of the fence in terms of trying to develop a technology that's doing something for athletes. Like, do you still think of yourself as an athlete to some degree? And so like that, clearly you do, right? And you carry that over. And then
he's still a coach.
Like I know the person sitting to your right does.
I'm a coach for life, and that's the other thing. I can't help myself.
Well, like you're well balanced, right? So you carry formerly like being an athlete, still think in those terms, coach, scientist, and it's being able to combine all of those things, right? Because there's this cascade of effects on any given student athlete,
right?
And you ask better. I'm gonna write you a Hallmark card. You ask better questions because you carry those experiences forward into the work that you're doing, and I think Coach Hudy does the same.
Yeah, one of the important things I'll say, and it doesn't get said enough, is you have to know what you don't know. I don't know it all. The first thing I tell coaches, first thing I tell any audience, I know a lot, but I don't know it all. And when I don't know something, I make sure that I'm not running out of my lane. I find I've got so many great people around me over the last decades at all the schools I've been at and here at UConn and as well in Ohio State, that when you don't know something, you can't be a know-it-all. And too often people's self-esteem are tied into the fact that I've had teams of great people working with me, from postdocs, undergrads, grad students of all levels, colleagues. So, it's just like I've been given credit for a lot of things. That basically it took teams all the time. And you never do it as an isolated person. We're not into making an equation in physics or something like that. You're dealing with a team approach that has all these dynamics, and but a lot of times people don't want to give credit or don't want to understand that you have to put the thing together as a puzzle with all the different aspects. In academia, we talk about multi-dimensional research, and that's been a lot of lip service because it's difficult to put a bunch of people together. I know in one situation they put us all together, so they work together. Well, we didn't like each other, for crying out loud. So why would you want to work together? So it really comes down to understanding what you know, what you don't know, and drawing in and digging deep with the people that do have the experience. I listen to coaches, what their challenges are. I listen to what the problem of the context is, for we want to do this, but here's why we can't do it. It took me 2 years at Ohio State to get our women's soccer team now doing an in-season strength training program because of the data and how you do it. So a lot of it has to be shown to the coach. I remember back in the day in Connecticut when we were here in the early days in '87, we finally got Coach Calhoun to believe that we should do strength training year round. We did that because we did a program. They were successful at the NIT, and next thing you know, hey, we're doing strength training year round. So coaches look at wins. It's got to show up on their ledger. Otherwise, I used to say, do you have the people that can win with? That's the other thing. So you got to recruit the right people. So it gets into a lot of the recruiting. And when we worked with Coach Etzel back in the day with Coach Martin, we had to say, that's a great kid. He's an all-state in Connecticut, but he can't play BCS football, and not at that position. You don't play offensive line at 6 foot, 250 if you're going to play Notre Dame. Okay, so the bottom line is realities had to set in. So there's lots of experiences, but it's a team phenomenon. That's why we're just pushing here, is because one person is difficult to do it, but technology makes some things more capable of getting the accurate data. But there's a lot of technology out there that's not valid, and that's the thing you worry about, the validity of it.
Well, I want to thank you both. I could just keep going, but obviously we should just get together for dinner sometime, and just that way there are no constraints. It's funny that you mentioned technology being valid, because when I met Coach Hudy, we'd actually gone down to do a validation study with Dr. Fry, which, by the way, how did it take us an hour to mention Dr. Fry? But
well, by the way, Dr. Fry is a former student of mine, PhD student of mine from Penn State.
I know. There are all these connections, right? Because like you've mentioned Coach Martin several times, and every time it brings a smile to my face, because my first experience with him was at one of Hudy's conferences. And I just ended up sitting in the back, and I think it was like Coach Martin was on my left, and I think Brian Mann was on my right. And I was like, okay, well, I'm the total imposter sitting between these two. But it's kind of to one of the points you were making earlier. Coach Martin had like his notebook out, and here's a guy, incredibly smart, well-versed in the field. And I kind of glance over it, and all he's doing is writing down questions. Like, so he's listening. I honestly don't remember who the speaker was, but he's just writing down questions, and it's his curiosities that are making the page. It's not, he's forgotten more about, I'll just call it this life, right, than I will ever remember. And yet all he's doing is like, what is the next thing he's thinking about?
Well, I think first of all, Coach Hudy and I both had the honor of working with Coach Martin. And I look at Jerry as being, one of those scenarios where, as we all know, many people pass away long before their time. And I remember having him in master's graduate classes when I was an adjunct professor at UConn back in '85. He took exercise biochemistry with me, and also muscle physiology with me when I would teach as an adjunct for the program at that time in '85 and '86 when I was an adjunct. But it's one of those things where I think that's right. It was a curiosity, and it was also the respect for the fact that the knowledge bases out there can actually help us in what we're doing. And that I gave a talk way back in the '80s where I used to stand up on my soapbox as I started my career early '80s in my doctoral work. It was the fact that you got to open the books again, folks. You got to start studying, because the days of just walking in because you know about how to power lift isn't going to work anymore. And I could see it coming. So that's part and parcel of it. But yeah, I think I value the time that I spent with Coach Martin over the many years and all the interactions, and I miss it dearly each day. And that's why I'm reaching out to Coach Hudy, and that's why I love working with my Ohio State group. It's great to have that coaching interface, because for me, you take that away, I don't feel that I'm whole. So that's something that's been very important, and definitely was nurtured with that whole experience at UConn with Coach Martin.
I completely appreciate kind of how you're tying all of that together. It's probably a good place to sort of to end our conversation here. I know that, like, for me, one of the reasons I like doing the podcast is just as EliteForm has grown, I don't actually get out into weight rooms as much. And so like most of my fond memories and the reason I really love what I do is like the side conversations with Coach Hudy, or like at that conference I was referencing, like I was eating lunch and I just kind of sat down by myself because I was like, man, I'm a vendor, like in a lot of people's eyes, like, no one's going to hang out. And then Coach Martin sat down. And then right after that, Glenn Kane came over and sat down, and we had this great conversation. And like some of the topics we've discussed today were topics at this little lunch meeting. Is what it came. It's like a little mini conference, right, over lunch. And so for me, those are always the things I hold on to, and I'm sure I'll hold on to this conversation in the same way. So thanks to you both for coming on.
Yep.
Hopefully we can schedule it again.
Yep. Happy to
cover
do it.
some more ground, but appreciate you both. Thanks again.
No
Thank
problem. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day.
You too. Appreciate it.
Bye. Bye.
Here we go.